Who invited you? 4 words, flat and cold, from a man who hadn't looked me in the eye in 3 years. My father crossed the ballroom floor like he was closing a distance he resented having to travel, his jaw already set before he'd even reached me. Behind him, my sister's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Her husband's phone buzzed against his palm, unanswered, forgotten for the moment in favor of watching my father dismantle me in front of 40 strangers. "Aunt Corinne," I said, keeping my voice level. "She thought I should be here." My father turned to glare at his own sister across the room, and Corinne met that look without flinching, the particular stillness of someone who'd spent 60 years refusing to be intimidated by her older brother. I want to be honest about what that moment cost me, because it would be easy to tell this story like I walked into that ballroom armored and unbothered. I wasn't. Every part of me had spent the drive over rehearsing reasons to turn around. To understand why 4 words from my own father could still land like that, you have to go back 9 years, to a dinner table where I told my family I'd enlisted, and watched my father's face rearrange itself into something I'd never seen it wear before. I was 23, freshly graduated, sitting across from my parents and my younger sister Vanessa in the house I'd grown up in, holding a piece of news I'd been carrying for months, certain, foolishly certain, that they'd be proud. "I'm commissioning," I told them. "Officer training starts in 8 weeks. My mother set down her fork. My father didn't move at all, which somehow felt worse. Vanessa, 20 and midway through her 2nd year of business school, filled the silence the way she always did, not maliciously, just reflexively, the way people fill silence when they've never had to sit inside one. "Wow," she said. "That's a choice." My father finally spoke, and his voice carried none of the warmth he'd used 2 months earlier toasting Vanessa's internship offer at a firm downtown. "You had options," he said. "Good ones. And you're choosing this." I tried explaining that I wanted something that demanded more of me than a corner office ever would, that I'd thought about it for over a year, that this wasn't a phase or a rebellion, just a decision I'd made with my whole chest. He wasn't listening. I could see it in the way his eyes had already sorted the room into 2 categories before I'd finished my sentence: Vanessa, going somewhere. Me, throwing something away. "Don't expect this family to put our lives on hold for whatever this turns out to be," he said, and that sentence took up permanent residence somewhere behind my ribs. 9 years is a long time to carry one sentence. Long enough that I almost convinced myself I'd stopped hearing it. Almost. The years that followed weren't the highlight reel people imagine when they picture military service. They were early mornings memorized by muscle memory, moving to a new post before I'd finished unpacking from the last, learning to function on interrupted sleep because the mission didn't care how tired I was. I was handed responsibility for people's safety, for equipment worth more than my father's entire dental practice, for decisions that came with no undo button. I grew into someone none of them would have recognized from that dinner table, steadier in the ways that mattered, softer in the ways that surprised even me. Every phone call home followed the same tired script. "So when's this phase going to be over?" my father would ask, like he was checking on an illness he assumed I'd eventually recover from. I stopped explaining somewhere around the 4th or 5th call. There's a particular exhaustion in defending your life to someone who's already decided not to believe you, and I got tired of bleeding for approval that was never coming. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life unfolded exactly the way my father had scripted it at that dinner table. Business school, a coveted internship, then a full-time offer at Holbrook & Weiss, one of the city's largest consulting firms. She met Marcus there, sharp-dressed, quick with a handshake, always ready with a story about a client meeting that somehow required mentioning his firm's name 3 separate times. My father adored him instantly. Marcus represented everything he respected, a confident man in a good suit, closing deals, shaking hands that mattered. He introduced Marcus at every gathering with real warmth in his voice, warmth I hadn't heard directed at me since I was 23. The irony never seemed to register with him. A man who advised companies on cutting corners impressed him more than a daughter who'd spent 9 years actually serving something larger than herself. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering, the kind of print job that cost real money. Vanessa had made senior consultant, a milestone worth celebrating, genuinely, and I meant that. But when I flipped the envelope to check the return address, the name wasn't my father's, and it wasn't Vanessa's either. It belonged to Aunt Corinne, my father's younger sister, the only person in that family who'd never let 9 years of distance calcify into 9 years of forgetting me. Tucked inside was a note in Corinne's handwriting, ink slightly smudged like she'd written it fast, before she lost her nerve. "You're still family. Don't let him convince you otherwise." My first instinct was to decline, not out of spite, but self-preservation. I didn't want to become the story of somebody else's celebration. Corinne called before I could write back my regrets. She didn't ask how I was doing. She never did. She got straight to it, the way she always had. "Your father's been telling everyone at the club that his daughter finally made something of herself," she said, slow enough that I'd catch exactly which daughter she meant. I already knew. Then she asked the question that actually changed my mind. "How many more years are you going to avoid a room just because he happens to be standing in it?" I didn't have an answer. So I said I'd go. What I hadn't told a single member of my family, not even Corinne, was that for the past several months, I'd been assigned to a small oversight working group reviewing contractor compliance on a handful of government logistics accounts. Unglamorous, procedural work, mostly spreadsheets and flagged discrepancies routed up a chain most people never see. One name had crossed my desk more than once in recent weeks, buried in paperwork nobody outside a small circle was supposed to be discussing yet: Holbrook and Weiss, the firm advising a subcontractor currently under review for cost reporting irregularities. I want to be honest about what I knew and didn't know, because the truth is less dramatic than the version where I'd been secretly investigating my sister's boyfriend for sport. I hadn't. I knew the account was flagged. I knew Marcus's name appeared on several of the engagement documents. I didn't yet know how deep it went. What I did know was enough to make me careful about what I said, and to whom, and when. I told no one in my family, not to protect Marcus, but because I understood the difference between what I knew professionally and what I had any right to discuss over hors d'oeuvres. The night of the celebration, I chose a simple navy dress instead of anything that hinted at a uniform. I wanted to walk into that room as somebody's older sister, not as an officer carrying files she couldn't discuss. The check-in table sat at the edge of the ballroom, gold light pooling across marble floors, the kind of room that made you lower your voice without being told to. A young woman ran her finger down the guest list, found my name, and paused just slightly, long enough for me to notice. "You're on Ms. Whitfield's list," she said, gesturing toward the ballroom doors like she already knew something I didn't. Corinne found me before I found her, cutting through the crowd in deep green, arms already open. We hugged longer than either of us probably intended. Then my father saw me. His face changed the way weather changes, not gradually, but all at once, the smile simply stopping mid-motion. He crossed the room, and for one absurd second I let myself hope for an embrace. He didn't offer one. "Who invited you?" he said instead, flat and cold, loud enough that the people nearest us heard it too. "Aunt Corinne," I said, keeping my voice even. Vanessa appeared beside him a moment later, stunning in deep blue, arms already crossing over her chest before she'd said hello. "Tonight is about my career," she said. "I know," I told her. "I came to congratulate you." She looked me over, top to bottom, the way you'd size up someone who'd wandered into the wrong wedding. "You didn't need to," she said, quiet enough to seem private, loud enough that it wasn't. My father said nothing. That silence hurt more than anything either of them had said out loud. Somebody nearby, making polite conversation, asked what I did for a living. My father answered before I could open my mouth. "She's still in the army," he said, leaning on the word still until it sounded less like a fact and more like an apology he was issuing on my behalf. I kept my own answer simple. "I'm an officer." "Anyway," my father said, already turning away, "Vanessa's the one we're celebrating tonight." Nobody argued. 9 years teaches you which battles are worth the air it takes to fight them, and a stranger's cocktail hour curiosity wasn't one of mine. That's when Marcus approached, phone still pressed to his ear, voice low and tight in a way that didn't match the mood of the room. I caught fragments as he got closer: review, documentation, contracting office, before he ended the call and slid the phone into his jacket. He looked up, saw me, and his expression soured instantly. Vanessa filled the silence for him. "My sister just showed up," she said. Marcus, already wound tight from whatever call he'd just ended, turned that tension straight at me. "Why the hell would you be here tonight?" A few heads turned. I felt the room's attention shift, that particular hush right before people pretend not to be listening. I looked at him and understood something none of them did yet. He had no idea who I actually was. Before I could answer, a voice cut through the noise behind me, deep, unmistakably military in its cadence. "Captain Whitfield." Marcus froze mid-breath, whatever he'd been about to say dying somewhere in his throat. The voice belonged to Colonel Anita Reyes, an officer I'd worked alongside years earlier on a logistics assignment that taught me more in 6 months than most jobs teach in 6 years. Her nephew, it turned out, worked at Holbrook and Weiss, which explained her presence in a ballroom I never expected to find her in. She crossed toward me with the easy confidence of someone used to rooms rearranging themselves around her, and extended her hand. "I had no idea you'd be here tonight." "Neither did I, Colonel," I said, shaking it. "Not about you, anyway." My father went completely still. I watched the color drain slightly from his face, his jaw working like he was solving a math problem that refused to add up. Vanessa's expression shifted too, confusion replacing irritation. "Captain," she said, almost to herself. In 9 years, she'd never once asked what rank I held. My father, still catching up, turned to the nearest stranger. "What does captain mean, exactly?" A man nearby, someone who'd clearly served himself, judging by the quiet certainty in his voice, answered before I could. "03, he said. Then, kindly but plainly, seeing my father's blank stare, "Your daughter's a company-grade officer with real responsibility." I watched the air in that little circle change. People who'd barely registered my presence 10 minutes earlier were suddenly recalibrating something in real time. Marcus's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. Colonel Reyes asked, casual and familiar, "Still doing compliance oversight work?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. Marcus heard it. I watched the words land on him like a physical weight, compliance oversight, and whatever irritation had been sitting behind his eyes shifted into something closer to alarm. "Where exactly do you work?" he asked, all his earlier edge gone. "You really want to ask me that here?" I said. He didn't answer. Vanessa, sensing the temperature had changed without understanding why, looked between us. "What is going on?" Nobody answered her either. After the toasts, Marcus pulled me aside near the bar, Vanessa close behind, her champagne forgotten on a table somewhere. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "How much do you know?" "About what?" I asked, though I understood exactly what he meant. "Don't play that game with me." "Then you should probably be specific about what you're worried I know." What followed wasn't quite a confession, more a slow unraveling. His firm had been advising a subcontractor now under scrutiny for cost-reporting irregularities tied to a government logistics contract. I wasn't an investigator. I had no authority to end anything on my own. But in the course of my actual job, I'd flagged inconsistencies that had crossed my desk, and routed the concern through proper channels, the way anyone in my position was required to. Marcus had known a review was underway. What he hadn't known until tonight was that I'd been one of the people who first noticed the numbers didn't add up. Vanessa stood there absorbing it, something cracking behind her composed exterior. "You told me it was routine," she said to him. "It is," Marcus said, too quickly. "Then why do you look terrified?" He had no answer for that either. My father walked into the middle of it, catching only the tail end, and, true to 9 years of habit, positioned himself beside Vanessa without asking a single question first. That's enough. This is your sister's night. I looked at him. Do you even know what's happening right now? I know you're ruining a party. Something in me went quiet and still, the way it does right before you finally accept a truth you've been circling for years. So 9 years hasn't changed anything, I said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was the same one he'd been giving me since I was 23, standing in his dining room, waiting for him to understand that choosing a hard life wasn't the same as choosing a failed one. A few weeks later, my father showed up at my apartment. No party, no crowd to perform for, just a 61-year-old man sitting across from me, looking older than I remembered, finally reckoning with 9 years he couldn't get back. I thought, he said, choosing his words carefully, that if you didn't choose the path I expected, it meant you were choosing wrong. I let him sit in that sentence a while before I answered. You never needed to understand the army, I said. You just needed to respect me. He nodded slowly, something genuinely worn in his face, not performing regret but carrying it. Do I still have a chance to fix this? He finally asked, quiet in a way I'd never heard from him before. You do, I said. But you're starting from zero. Months later, I invited him to an event with my unit, nothing formal, just a gathering where families were welcome. He asked if he could come. I said yes. He sat among spouses and parents of the people I served with, and for the first time in his life, watched the world I'd spent 9 years building instead of hearing about it secondhand through a phone call he'd only half listened to. When I was recognized that evening for something our team had accomplished, I looked out and saw him standing, clapping, his face doing something I hadn't seen it do in a very long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something quieter than that, relief, mostly. Because the real reward was never watching Marcus unravel, or Vanessa question herself, or my father finally bowing his head. It was simpler than any of that. It was the fact that I'd built a life worth being proud of across 9 years when none of them were paying attention, and I never once needed their permission to do it. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where it landed. Have you ever had to build a life quietly, without waiting for someone else's approval to make it count? Tell me in the comments, and if this one stayed with you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.